The ancient Mayan civilization continues to fascinate entire generations with its genius in areas such as astronomy, architecture, and mathematical calculation. However, it is in its spiritual legacy that the most intriguing aspects are hidden. Their creation stories, full of trials and failures, their enigmatic gods who manifested themselves in metropolises such as Tikal, Palenque, and Chichen Itza, and the way they conceived time and the sacred reveal, a culture deeply connected to the mysteries of the cosmos. For the Mayan sages, the emergence of human beings did not happen in a simple or linear way. Ancient records tell that the creators, in their eagerness to form creatures capable of revering the gods and preserving their stories, made a first effort using clay. The result, however, was unstable. Fragile bodies, unable to withstand even the rain. Persistent, the gods tried again, this time molding men out of wood. These beings walked and talked, but they had no soul. They were empty inside, with no memory or respect for those who had created them. They lived oblivious to natural harmony and, for this reason, were destroyed. From their fall, say the Maya, came monkeys and birds. This series of failures in creation carries a valuable lesson. The idea that true humanity is not made up of form alone, but also of consciousness and reverence for what is greater. Everything must be in balance: the body, the spirit, the earth, and the invisible. In the Mayan worldview, divinity is not confined to figures with form or name. The word Qhui represents an invisible sacred presence that manifests itself in all elements of creation. When one speaks of Kuhul, one speaks of the vital energy that pulses in rivers, trees, animals, stones, winds, and men. This force traverses the visible and invisible worlds, making it clear that nothing exists without a spiritual spark. Mayan spirituality was not a simple veneration of isolated gods, but rather a profound recognition that everything in the universe is imbued with something greater. Another area in which the Maya demonstrated extraordinary mastery was in their understanding of time. They developed calendars that still impress today with their accuracy and complexity. One of them, with 260 days, became known as the Solquim, a name later given to it by researcher William E. Gates. Originally used for ceremonial purposes and predictions, this calendar consisted of 20 cycles of 13 days. Each of these days had its own name, symbol, and spiritual purpose. The first, called Emix, was linked to the earth and the dragon, while the last, Ahava, referred to the sun, power, and renewal. This calendar is still used today in some regions of Guatemala and Oaxaca, preserving ancestral practices that have stood the test of time. Each combination of day and number carries unique meanings and was used to determine auspicious dates for ceremonies, planting, weddings, or spiritual initiations. The solar calendar, called Hada, was based on 365 days, divided into 9 periods of 40 days, totaling 360. The remaining 5 days were viewed with suspicion. Considered dangerous, they were avoided whenever possible. On these days, it was believed that negative forces roamed freely, bringing bad luck, disease, or imbalance. This fear reveals how the Maya viewed time not only as a count, but as something alive, full of meaning, and with moments when spiritual protection was even more necessary. Another, even more complex system was the so-called long count. It began to be used around the 3rd century AD, although its roots date back to the ancient Olmecs. This way of recording time allowed historical events to be marked from an inaugural date corresponding to August 13th, 3114 BC, according to the calendar we use today. Unlike cyclical systems, the long count was linear in nature and was used to record important events larger cycles, and even predictions of the future. It was this system that led many in 2012 to believe that the end of the world was near. The end of the 13th Baktun on December 21st of that year generated commotion and speculation of all kinds. A Baktun represents almost 4 centuries, and its end would signal, according to some, a cosmic closure. However, several Mayan interpretations pointed not to destruction, but to renewal, the beginning of a new cycle, an energetic reconfiguration of the world. Even with such sophistication in the study of time and connection with the divine, many aspects of this culture remain shrouded in secrecy. There are symbols, codices, and practices that have only recently begun to be deciphered. And the more that is revealed, the more the feeling grows that great truths are yet to come. Fragments of wisdom that have escaped the filters of history. In the traditions preserved among the Quiche Maya of present-day Guatemala, there is a myth that tells of a great flood sent by a deity named Huracan. Described as the mother and father of the gods, Huracan is said to have unleashed the flood upon those who did not know how to honor the life they had been given. And, according to Friar Bartolomé de las Casas, the Maya feared that after the water would come a punishment of fire, a final purification to restore what had been corrupted. Among the most emblematic accounts preserved in the spiritual tradition of the Maya is the creation of humanity under the direction of 2 divine figures, Tepeu and Kukulkan. These celestial beings, aware of the need to create creatures that would preserve their memories and keep alive their reverence for the sacred, entrusted Huracan with the mission of shaping the visible world. Under his command, mountains, rivers, animals, and the first winds appeared. However, creating the perfect human being proved to be an arduous task, full of mistakes, adjustments, and learning. In their first attempt, they used clay as raw material. The result was discouraging. The bodies molded from mud fell apart easily, unable to withstand rain or their own weight. There was no firmness or stability. The second experiment sought firmness and resistance. They created men and women out of wood. Physically functional, these beings moved and spoke, but they lacked a soul. They showed no gratitude and did not recognize the gods. Without memory, they lived oblivious to the order of the world. It was then that the creators decided to eradicate them with a brutal punishment, a flood of scalding water that swept the earth and sealed the end of that insensitive lineage. Only when corn was chosen as the primordial substance did creation find harmony. With white and yellow corn, they molded flesh. From red corn, they extracted blood. And to sculpt skin, they used wood, this time as a symbolic support, not as essence. For the Maya, corn was the staple food, but also the sacred origin of life. The connection between physical survival and spiritual origin was so deep that it transcended everyday life and was fixed at the core of their collective identity. 2 sacred texts concentrate the details of these accounts: the Popol Vuh, from the mountainous region of Guatemala, and the Chilambala de Chumayel, associated with Yucatan. In the Popol Vuh, there is a sequence of failed creations, with the deities evaluating and correcting their own mistakes until they find the ideal combination. The fragile and disorganized men of clay gave way to those of wood, who were more resistant but lacked spirit. The latter, arrogant and immortal, completely ignored the gods. As punishment, they suffered a boiling flood, and only a few traces of this race survived, transforming into animals. Chilambala, on the other hand, presents a poetic variation. Trees and stones sprout from the earth itself, and, when they take human form, become the founders of communities. Despite the symbolic differences, both versions emphasize the deep integration between nature and the birth of humanity. The creation of beings made of corn did not mean the end of the divine mission. After forming the first true humans, the gods entrusted them with caring for the earth, extracting beauty from stones, and cultivating the arts. Life came to be understood as a constant exchange. Men honored the gods with work and rituals. The gods, in turn, ensured balance, harvests, and protection. In this same symbolic universe, the twin heroes Hunahpu and Xbalanque stand out, protagonists of extraordinary feats that marked the collective memory of the Maya. These brothers faced the traps of Xibalba, the underground world ruled by dark entities. During their trials, they fell into a fire trap, were torn to pieces, cremated, and their ashes thrown into a river. However, they were reborn from the waters in a new form and, in disguise, returned to take revenge on their tormentors. After defeating them, they were transformed into celestial bodies. Hunahpu became the moon, and Xbalanque became the sun. With that, their deeds were immortalized in the sky and in the hearts of the people. The historical trajectory of the Maya is divided into three distinct periods. The first, known as the Preclassic period, lasted from around 2000 BC to 250 AD and witnessed the first written records, the emergence of ceremonial centers, and the flourishing of the first cities in the Mirador Basin. The Classic period between 250 and 900 marked the height of the civilization, with metropolises such as Tikal, Palenque, Copan, and Koba reaching impressive splendor. Palaces, pyramids, and astronomical observatories emerged as expressions of the union between faith and knowledge. Finally, the post-classical period, which lasted until the arrival of the Spanish in 1521, was marked by significant transformations. Cities such as Chichen Itza and Uxmal took center stage, and new social and religious practices began to emerge. Agriculture was the basis of the Mayan economy, and no crop was more important than corn. Its presence went beyond the physical realm. Popular legends spoke of the mountain from which corn seeds were taken after a magical opening, revealing the generosity of the earth. Among peasants, corn was often portrayed as a feminine, maternal, and fertile figure. For the elite, however, it was represented with masculine traits, related to power and sovereignty, reflecting how different strata of society related to the sacred. The role of the twin heroes was more than symbolic. They were archetypes that illustrated the fundamental dualities of existence: light and dark, birth and death, victory and loss. Their stories, told by elders, sung in rituals, and inscribed on murals, taught values such as bravery, intelligence, and reverence for the mysteries of creation. Another essential character in the Mayan pantheon was Chak, the Lord of Rain. Carrying a torch or an axe made of lightning, he represented both fertility and destruction. His mood dictated the fate of crops, bountiful harvests, or parched lands. Entire communities organized ceremonies with dances, songs, and offerings to please him, seeking protection against periods of drought and begging for gentle rains that would ensure life. In the Yucatan Peninsula, where rivers are scarce, cenotes became vital. More than just sources of drinking water, they were seen as portals to the underworld. It was believed that spirits and gods inhabited those crystalline depths. Over time, the Catholic faith brought new figures, such as St. Thomas, who were associated with the ancient cults of the cenotes. This fusion gave rise to hybrid practices that persist to this day in prayers, offerings, and ceremonies celebrated along the banks of these natural caves. Among the most emblematic characters preserved in Mayan traditions, one figure stands out who transcended the limits of human leadership to become a solar deity: Itzamna. Originally seen as a great sage and priest, he is said to have arrived in the Yucatan region accompanied by the Bacalar Chans, a group that would later become known as the Itzayas. It was under his guidance that, around 525 AD, the legendary city of Chichen Itza was built, one of the most influential spiritual and political centers in the Mayan world. During his time in the region, Itzamna not only led, but also shared teachings that profoundly shaped the local culture. According to records by historian Juan Francisco Molina Solis, he was not only a ruler, but also someone with a deep mastery of sacred and secular knowledge. He is credited with naming lands and localities throughout the territory of ancient Mayab, now Yucatan. Under the alternative name of Akin Chan, he was also remembered as a priest of the Chan, responsible for expanding their spiritual influence along the founding routes of Ekbalam, Motul, Izamal, and Etejo, the latter located where Merida stands today. His wisdom led him to be associated with the vital elements of existence. Over time, he was venerated as an entity linked to the sun and rain, embodying the force of nature and the cycle of life. He is also credited with creating primitive symbols that gave rise to the Mayan writing system, establishing the first formal records of language in the territory. In contrast to the solar figure of Itzamna, there is Ixchel, one of the most complex and revered female deities in Mayan spirituality. Seen as the protector of women, medicine, and the art of weaving, she represented both care and destruction. Friar Diego de Landa, who wrote about Mayan customs in the 16th century, described her as a powerful maternal force. In the Dresden Codex, she appears as the goddess O, an elderly woman with jaguar features on her ears, an animal that symbolizes strength and darkness. In a famous piece of pottery known as the birth vase, Ixchel is shown coordinating a birth, flanked by other elderly women, reinforcing her role as a guide of life forces and healing. The Maya were not unaware of the dark side of the world. Among the feared entities was Kakasval, a monstrous-looking figure with a demonic essence. Described as a gigantic creature covered in hair, with multiple arms and legs ending in sharp claws, he carried in his eyes a destructive power capable of killing with a single glance. It was said that his passage left forests devastated, animals lifeless, and fields ravaged. His breath, impregnated with poison, dried up crops and reduced the fertility of the land. The myth of Kakasval reflected human fragility in the face of the uncontrollable forces of nature and the invisible. In the realm of war and sacrifice, the figure of Buluk Chaptana emerged, associated with violent death and the fury of combat. In ancient codices, his face appears marked by a dark band covering his eye and the side of his face, a sign of his connection to blood rituals and sacred violence. He was associated with gods such as Kakupakat and Pakok Ekchunkak, auxiliary entities that guided warriors, influenced confrontations, and revealed the position of enemies. The number 11, represented by a symbol above his head, marked his power and presence on the battlefield. Another prominent spirit was Hurakan, the lord of storms and primordial forces. He is credited with the devastation of the second human generation, made of wood, through a furious and fatal storm. His nature, as chaotic as it is necessary, is reflected in his very name, from which the word hurricane derives. His image appears linked to the god K, an entity with a hybrid body, one side human, the other serpentine. This union of forms expressed the indomitable force of climatic phenomena and their importance in cosmogonic beliefs. Ka Will, in turn, represented the power of the vital spark, lightning. He was depicted with an extended snout, wide eyes, and one leg ending in a serpent with its jaws open. On his forehead, a flame or burning cigar symbolized the connection between heaven and earth. In the hands of the rain gods, and in the figures of kings, Ka-Will was shown as an emblem of authority and divine gift, a sign that the power to create and destroy came directly from above. Among the sun gods, Ahab occupied a privileged position. Known as the Lord of the Sun's Eye, he was Ixchel's companion and served as a bridge between the divine world and the earthly plane. Over time, he came to be seen as the divine manifestation of Itzamna himself after his ascension to the spiritual world. Priests consulted Ahab for important decisions, such as the distribution of land or the performance of prophetic rituals. Patron of the arts, he was also honored in celebrations dedicated to music and poetry. One of the most notable pieces linked to his figure is a ceremonial urn made of clay, over a meter high, dating from between the 7th and 9th centuries. Preserved in the Museo de America in Madrid, it bears witness to the aesthetic and spiritual devotion of the Maya people. Within this universe of beliefs, there is still a name feared by the Lacandon descendants, Kisin. Translated as the Stinky One, this evil entity rules a dark realm similar to purgatory, through which many souls must pass. Warriors killed in battle, and women who die in childbirth escape this fate. But those who take their own lives are condemned to remain in this space forever. Their fury is so intense that, when they strike the base of the sacred ceiba tree, the tree of life, they can cause earthquakes. For the Maya, such tremors were signs of their wrath, manifesting itself among the living. Unlike Western conceptions that divide existence into two extremes, heaven and hell, the Mayan view of the world was much more complex and structured. For these people, the universe was composed of three interconnected planes: the upper world, the earthly plane, and the underworld. The celestial realm, home to benevolent gods and higher forces, was made up of 13 layers, each inhabited by distinct deities. The earth, where humans live, was seen as a transitional bridge between the spheres. The underworld, known as Xibalba, was composed of 9 layers, where dark entities and deceased ancestors resided. This balance between planes was not merely symbolic. The ceiba, a sacred tree of the Maya, represented this vertical connection between the worlds. Its roots plunged into the deepest recesses of the underworld, while its branches extended to touch the heavens. This cosmic tree was seen as the true backbone of the universe, allowing the flow of energy and souls between the different levels of existence. The way the Maya understood space also reveals their symbolic sophistication. For them, the world was not just divided into north, south, east, and west. There was a fifth direction, the center, considered the most important. The east was associated with the birth of the sun and the constant renewal of life, carrying a meaning of new beginnings and hope. Inside homes, fireplaces were usually built exactly in the center, symbolizing the spiritual axis of the home and the connection with the cardinal points. This understanding of sacred geography was also reflected in the way certain places were interpreted. Caves, lakes, and especially cenotes, natural wells with deep waters, were not seen only as sources of water. They represented true portals to the afterlife. The karst region of the Yucatan Peninsula, full of underground formations, reinforced this connection with the invisible. Various religious ceremonies took place in these environments, seeking to establish contact with deities or obtain messages from ancestors who inhabited the lower planes. Among the many aspects that marked the bond between the people and their gods, few were as significant as the practice of ritual bloodletting. Blood was considered the most valuable offering, a vital substance capable of strengthening the ties between humans and the sacred. Princes and priests pierced parts of their bodies, such as the tongue or genitals, to offer drops of blood to the gods. On more important occasions, prisoners were sacrificed. The surrender could take place in various ways, from ceremonial decapitation to the extraction of the still-beating heart, or the throwing of the living body into the sea notes, a symbolic gesture of direct surrender to the underworld. In addition to human victims, offerings included precious items such as jade, seashells, and shiny metals. In some traditions, children were thrown alive into cenotes in the belief that they would return to the surface bearing divine messages. Even more everyday ceremonies, such as weddings, took on a religious character. These unions generally followed well-defined social criteria and were seen as a way of ensuring the continuity of sacred lineages, especially after periods of crisis, such as wars or natural disasters. Certain Mayan legends echo themes found in other cultures. The saga of Hunahpu and Xbalanque, for example, fits into the concept of the monomyth, a mythical structure common to various civilizations as proposed by Joseph Campbell. One of the best-known episodes involves the fight against the demonic bird Kubka Kix, who claimed to be the sun and the moon. Armed with a blowgun, Hunahpu struck the creature, restoring balance to the cosmos. Over time, the twins came to occupy the skies as new celestial bodies, representing the real sun and moon. The Mayan calendar, in addition to its astronomical precision, marked the rhythm of a vibrant religiosity. Each month was accompanied by specific festivities, with rituals dedicated to gods and symbolic activities. In the month of Huinalhuo, priests predicted the events of the following cycle. In Huinalzib, Ixchel was honored with requests for health and protection for hunters. During Tisek, beekeepers celebrated with offerings of honey and fermented drinks made from balche bark. Yaxkina was dedicated to teaching young people traditional crafts, while the month of Jul exalted Kukulkan. Other periods, such as Sak and Mak, were aimed at purification or appeasement rituals. The festivities reached their most delicate point in Hualab, a 5-day cycle considered inauspicious. During this period, the Maya performed intense ceremonies to ward off negative influences and ensure protection until the start of the new year. Among the most enduring records of Mayan culture are stelae, vertical monuments carved in stone that narrated historical events, rituals, and royal genealogies. Tikal, in present-day Guatemala, has some of the oldest and most complex stelae known. These monuments were erected to record military victories, enthronement ceremonies, or important dates in the royal lineage. Each carved symbol carried multiple meanings, and their combination represented a sophisticated form of writing, full of symbolic layers. More than simple celebrations in stone, the stelae served as anchors of time. Through the K-tunes, 20-year cycles, the Maya mapped both the past and the future, building a continuous relationship with the rhythms of existence. Oaxactun and Tikal stood out as centers for the production and study of these inscriptions, which are still fundamental to understanding the language, cosmology, and historical records of this people. It is thanks to the stelae that much of what is known about Mayan culture has been reconstructed. They contain not only the deeds of kings or dates of battles, but fragments of the very soul of a people who sought, in stone and blood, to perpetuate their memory beyond time. If this content has touched you in any way, and you would like to support our work, any contribution makes a difference. Your support strengthens our mission to continue producing serious research and revealing content. We are immensely grateful for you joining us on this journey of discovery.